She says I smell poor, that I'm dirty, outdated, and beneath her. But what she doesn't know is that the fortune I own could crush the entire false pride her family clings to. She thought she could destroy me, but taking down a woman like me is never that easy. If you're curious to know how I escaped the nightmare called my daughter-in-law, then stay with me until the end of this video. I promise my story will not disappoint you. Don't forget to comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And if you believe that karma always finds its way, hit subscribe, like, and share this video to support me. If you see me sitting calmly today, know that once I was thrown out of my daughter-in-law's house on New Year's Eve. That night still burns in my memory like a scar that refuses to fade. The Grant mansion shimmered under hundreds of lights, the kind of luxury I had never cared for yet. There I was, invited only because of my son's insistence. Laughter echoed through the marble halls, champagne glasses clinked, and everyone pretended to be a perfect family. I stood near the corner, holding a small velvet purse, smiling when spoken to, though no one really looked at me. Hazel Grant. My daughter-in-law glided across the room in her silver gown, every sparkle reflecting the arrogance in her eyes. She leaned close to me, pretending to whisper something kind, but her words dripped with venom. Then, without warning, she grabbed my purse and threw it on the floor. The room fell silent. She raised her voice, her smile twisting into cruelty, as she said, I was embarrassing her family, that my presence ruined her party, that I was nothing but a poor, outdated woman clinging to her son's success. For a moment, I could not breathe. My son Elliot sat just a few steps away, frozen, his hands gripping his glass as if afraid it would shatter. I waited for him to say something, anything, but the silence from him hurt more than her words. I bent down slowly, my knees trembling, picked up my purse, and straightened my back. Inside that small bag was a folded yellow document I had carried for months, waiting for the right time. I looked at Hazel's father, Adrian Grant, and extended it to him without a word. His confident expression vanished as his eyes scanned the page. The laughter, the music, everything stopped. In that moment, the sparkle in the chandelier seemed cold, almost cruel, as if the entire house was watching me reclaim my dignity in silence. I was not always this calm. There was a time when life pushed me to the ground so hard that I thought I would never stand again. My name is Kennedy Wells, and for more than 20 years, I was a wife, a mother, and the quiet keeper of every receipt in our house. My husband used to say I was too cautious, always double-checking the bills, always writing down every expense in a notebook. He never understood that order was my way of surviving. I worked as a cashier at a large grocery store back then, trusted enough to balance the accounts and close the register every night. Numbers were my language. They never lied, even when people did. One evening, while reviewing the family credit card statement, I noticed strange charges at a restaurant across town, always on Fridays, always for two. I asked once gently, and he brushed it off. But I am not the kind of woman who ignores her instincts. I requested the camera footage from that restaurant saying there had been a billing error. When I saw his face on that screen, smiling across the table from another woman, I felt something inside me turn to stone. The next morning, I packed his things, filed for divorce, and walked into court without asking for a single penny of support. The years that followed were brutal. Rent was due. My son Elliot was still in college, and there were nights when I ate instant noodles while pretending to be full so he could have the last serving of rice. But I refused to crumble. I rented a small storefront on the edge of town and started a tiny supermarket. It began with only a few shelves, a second-hand cash register, and a lot of faith. The neighbors came by not because it was fancy, but because they trusted me. Some paid later, some left money in envelopes under the counter when I was not looking. Slowly, month by month, the business grew. I learned every law about small businesses, every rule about bookkeeping, every way to make a store survive in hard times. My hands, once soft from housework, became rough from lifting boxes. My voice, once shy, learned to say no. By the time Hazel came into Elliot's life, I had already built everything with my own strength. Maybe that is why her arrogance never impressed me. I had seen what real struggle looked like. When my father passed away, grief came quietly, like a soft knock I had expected, but still wasn't ready to answer. He left behind something more than memories, a lifetime of careful, saving a small fortune that spoke of his discipline and faith in me. The inheritance amounted to $1.2 million, a mixture of savings and shares from the logistics company he had built from nothing. When the lawyer handed me the folder, I didn't feel excitement. I felt the weight of responsibility, the kind that tests whether money would change the person I had become. For days, I thought about what to do. I could have bought a bigger house, a new car, even retired early. But I remembered my father's words during one of our last talks: real wealth is quiet. So I formed a small company called Kennedy Wells Holdings, LLC, and used it to purchase a 3-story commercial building on Main Street. It was my way of turning grief into something steady, something that would outlive me. I signed every paper myself, but I never told a soul, not even Elliot. The building looked ordinary from the outside, with red bricks and clean glass windows, nothing that screamed luxury. That was exactly how I wanted it. Months later, a real estate manager contacted me saying a coffee chain was interested in renting the first floor. I approved it without checking the tenant's name. Only after the lease was finalized did I learn it was the Grant Coffee franchise, the same one owned by my daughter-in-law's family. I almost laughed at the irony. Hazel Grant, with her polished smile and disdain for anyone beneath her, would soon be mailing rent checks to a company owned by the woman she called poor. I kept the secret locked tight, not out of revenge, but out of curiosity. I wanted to see how people treated me when they thought I had nothing. Every month, the rent payment arrived on time, neatly labeled, and I deposited it without comment. No one suspected a thing. At dinner parties, Hazel often boasted about how their coffee chain had the best location in town, never knowing I had chosen the color of those very bricks. Sometimes I passed by quietly, watching through the window as she gave orders to her staff, her tone sharp, her posture proud. I would sip my takeaway coffee and smile to myself, thinking how power always reveals character, but silence tests the soul. My son Elliot grew up to be everything I had hoped for: disciplined, kind, and brave. He joined the police academy at 22 and became one of the youngest officers in our district. His uniform suited him, and the neighbors often said, "I must be proud." I was. But pride has a shadow, and for me, it was loneliness. His schedule was brutal: nights patrolling empty streets, weekends on call, holidays cut short. I would often wake up at midnight to the sound of his boots on the porch, only to hear the door close again before I could say goodnight. Slowly, the house that once felt full of laughter turned into an echo of silence. When Elliot married Hazel Grant, I tried to believe it was love. She was charming at first, the kind of woman who could smile while calculating every word. Hazel came from a family that loved appearances. The Grants owned a chain of coffee shops across the state, or so they said. Their storefronts looked polished, filled with golden lights and expensive decor, but beneath the surface lay unpaid wages and delayed tax filings. I knew the type. I had seen such people at my old store, dressed well, owing everyone. Hazel had grown up watching her parents live beyond their means, learning that image mattered more than truth. She spoke with practiced sweetness, complimented everyone, and made sure every conversation left her looking gracious. But behind that flawless tone, there was calculation. She knew that marrying a police officer gave her something money couldn't buy: credibility. Elliot's uniform made her family's brand appear trustworthy, stable, even moral. At family dinners, she would slip her arm through Elliot's and speak about community service, charity work, and the partnership between law enforcement and small businesses. People admired her composure. I watched in silence, noticing how her smile never reached her eyes. Elliot, tired from his long shifts, rarely saw through it. He believed she simply wanted to make a good impression, and perhaps she did, but not for love, for leverage. The distance between my son and me widened with every promotion, every photo of Hazel on social media, holding coffee cups with captions about family values. When I called, he often answered softly, saying he'd call back later, then never did. Hazel once told me he was too busy to visit because the department was short-staffed. I wanted to believe her, but deep down, I knew she preferred him exhausted and distracted, too tired to see the cracks in the life she built around him. The Grants were the kind of people who lived louder online than they did in real life. Adrian and Sophia Grant were masters of performance, their lives carefully staged like a commercial that never ended. Their social media pages overflowed with smiling photos, champagne toasts, luxury cars, matching designer outfits, but anyone who knew the town's gossip understood the truth. Behind the glitter, there were overdue bills, maxed-out credit cards, and late paychecks waiting to be signed. They called it business pressure. I called it pretending. Adrian Grant managed 3 coffee shop branches under 1 business license. On paper, it looked impressive. In reality, he was constantly juggling complaints from labor inspectors about delayed wages. I once overheard Hazel defending her father, saying that expansion takes time, as if ethics could be postponed like rent. Adrian had a habit of talking about money as though it were proof of character. He enjoyed standing with one hand in his pocket, holding a glass of wine in the other, lecturing people about ambition. He once looked me straight in the eye and said, "Money doesn't buy happiness, but it sure makes people look happier." I smiled politely, while thinking how easy it was to sound wise when someone else was paying the bills. Sophia Grant. His wife played the role of image manager for the family brand. She loved the camera more than she loved reality. Her photos always showed her stepping out of luxury cars, posing at airports, or sipping coffee at the family's flagship cafe as if she were royalty. She posted captions about gratitude, success, and family values, while her credit cards screamed for mercy. Every month, she transferred small payments, just enough to keep the banks from freezing her accounts. I knew her type, the kind who believed appearances could erase debt. Together, Adrian and Sophia built a facade of prosperity so polished that investors started to believe it. Their online videos showed a picture-perfect family, with Hazel at the center, smiling, hugging employees, talking about dreams and growth. Behind those cheerful clips were unpaid invoices, personal loans disguised as business expenses, and accountants trying to keep up with the chaos. They filmed happiness to buy time. At social gatherings, Adrian liked to dominate conversations. He would wave his hand dismissively whenever someone mentioned the struggles of small shop owners or workers. To him, financial struggle was a symptom of laziness. I often sat quietly, studying his arrogance like a textbook. I had lived among hardworking people my whole life, women who saved coins in jars, men who skipped meals to pay rent, and yet, here he was, lecturing about success while drowning in debt. It amazed me how some people could mistake illusion for prestige, not realizing that borrowed luxury always has an expiration date. When Hazel married my son Elliot, I tried to believe our family was growing, not changing. She came into our lives with expensive perfume, perfect hair, and a smile that seemed to sparkle even when her eyes didn't. From the beginning, I noticed the little things, how she wrinkled her nose when she visited my modest home, how she looked around as if measuring how much I was worth in square footage. She would laugh lightly and say, "You should let us take care of you like our own mother." It sounded sweet, but every word was rehearsed for an audience that wasn't there yet. A few months after the wedding, Hazel suggested that I move in with them. She said it would help build stronger family bonds. Elliot repeated her words as if they were his own. I didn't want to be a burden, but Hazel insisted even arranging a small corner room in their large house. Later, I understood why. She wanted content pictures, videos, proof of her perfect family. She set up cameras in the kitchen and living room, live streaming their family life. On camera, she would smile brightly while feeding me soup, saying things like, "Family means taking care of each other." Off camera, she would drop the spoon in the sink with a clatter and mutter about how tiring it was to deal with old people's moods. Sometimes she would post a photo of me sitting quietly by the window with captions like, "Blessed to have my second mom living with us." I would scroll past them silently wondering who that blessed family really was. The truth was simpler and colder. When no one was filming, Hazel left dishes unwashed, slammed drawers, and threw my folded clothes on the chair, saying she had no time to play maid. Elliot never saw it. He was always on late shifts, and Hazel made sure to act exhausted whenever he came home sighing about how much work it took to care for his mother. One evening over dinner, she leaned closer and said sweetly, "If you have some savings, I could help you invest them. It would be safer than keeping money in the bank." The way she said it sounded innocent, but her eyes flickered with greed. I smiled, stirring my tea, and replied softly, "I live on my pension, dear. Not much to invest." Her expression tightened for a second, then the smile returned, fake polished, practiced. I had seen her kind before people who measured love in assets and respect in property deeds, so I decided to let her think I had nothing. I wore simple clothes, spoke little, and carried an old purse even when I went to the bank. Let her underestimate me, I thought. There is power in being the one everyone assumes is weak. Every morning began with Hazel's voice calling out sweetly, "Mom, let's cook breakfast together." Her tone could melt honey, and yet it made my stomach tighten. She would walk into the kitchen wearing a pastel apron and a wireless microphone, the camera light blinking red on the counter. I had learned to recognize that light the way a soldier recognizes the sound of a gun being cocked. The show had begun. Hazel's YouTube channel, Modern Family Grace, had gained thousands of followers, all admiring her for her kindness toward her poor old mother-in-law. On camera, she moved like an actress on a perfectly rehearsed set. She'd chop vegetables gracefully, narrate each step in a cheerful voice, and call me her inspiration. Sometimes she would take my hand dramatically and say, "My mom here taught me that family is everything." The comments section overflowed with heart emojis and praise. I stood beside her smiling faintly, feeling like a prop in a stage play that wasn't mine. But when the camera turned off, the air changed instantly. Hazel ripped off her apron, slammed the spoon on the counter, and muttered, "You're wasting my time." That video was useless. No trending topic, no emotion, nothing. Then she would shove the dishes into the sink so hard that water splashed on the floor. Once she turned to me, eyes sharp, and said, "Maybe if you looked a little more grateful, we'd get better views." I wanted to answer, but what would be the point? My words would only feed her performance. So I chose silence. I picked up the broken plate pieces, wiped the counter, and observed. There's something powerful about staying quiet when the other person expects you to explode. I realized Hazel's biggest weakness wasn't her cruelty. It was her obsession with appearance. She needed an audience. Without one, she was empty. That night while she slept, I took an old clock from my suitcase, a small brass desk clock my father once owned. Inside it, hidden beneath the battery panel, was a miniature camera no bigger than a button. I had bought it years ago after reading about elder abuse cases online, not because I expected to need it, but because life has a way of repeating its tests. From that day on, the clock sat quietly on the kitchen shelf, facing the dining table. I didn't plan revenge. I planned protection. I wanted the truth recorded, not for the internet, not for likes, but for justice when the time came. It didn't take long for me to see through Hazel's performance. Beneath the polished smile and flawless makeup, she was hollow, a woman who lived entirely for attention and applause. She spoke endlessly about health and family values online, yet couldn't fry an egg without burning it. Every morning, she would announce to her viewers that she had been cooking since sunrise. The kitchen would smell of expensive candles, not food. Soon after the camera light went off, I would find the truth stacked on the counter. Uber Eats and DoorDash receipts folded in a pile proof of another takeout meal, disguised as homemade love. Once she even held up a pot of soup in front of the camera, smiling proudly while saying she made it from scratch. I watched her stir the soup she had ordered 2 hours earlier, pretending to taste it with delight. When the live stream ended, she left it untouched, still warm in the pot. I quietly ate it later so it wouldn't go to waste. It was decent soup, the kind you get from a good restaurant, not from a kitchen filled with lies. At night, Hazel transformed into someone else entirely. The apron disappeared, replaced by glittering dresses and heels that clicked across the marble floor. She called them networking events, but I knew they were nothing more than parties with her circle of so-called successful women, all of them obsessed with image and envy. She would leave around 7, perfume trailing behind, and come home past midnight, posting photos of champagne glasses and hashtags about empowerment. Meanwhile, I sat in the kitchen with leftovers, the hum of the refrigerator keeping me company. I never said a word. I simply observed. People like Hazel always reveal themselves when they think no one is watching. But what began to worry me wasn't just her lies, it was her spending. Boxes from luxury brands piled near the door, bags of clothes she never wore, and receipts for spa treatments and jewelry she claimed were sponsorship gifts. Elliot's police salary couldn't possibly cover that. And I knew her family's coffee business had been struggling. They had already been late on multiple rent payments. One evening while collecting the mail, I noticed a bank envelope addressed to Elliot. The statement inside showed several withdrawals he hadn't mentioned. I didn't open it, but I understood enough. Hazel was dipping into money that wasn't hers, maybe from Elliot's account, maybe from her parents' company. The thought made my chest tighten. I had seen greed before. It always starts quietly disguised as ambition until it eats everything in its path. That night, the house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the old clock on the kitchen wall. Elliot had just come back from a long shift, his uniform still carrying the smell of rain and city dust. I waited until he sat down before speaking. My voice was calm, careful the way one approaches a wounded bird. I said softly, "Marriage doesn't need an audience, son. It needs honesty, not live streams." For a moment, his eyes flickered with something, maybe confusion, maybe guilt, but then he sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Mom, you don't understand how things work now," he said, forcing a tired smile. "Hazel's just trying to build something good for both of us. It's all about family image these days. People want to see love that looks real." I wanted to tell him that love doesn't have to look real when it is real, but I swallowed the words. The distance between us wasn't just physical anymore. It was emotional, digital, invisible, the kind that grows quietly between screens and filters. I tried again, more gently. I mentioned the credit card bills piling up, the takeout receipts, the shopping bags she never opened. Elliot's expression hardened. He said, "She has her own influencer income, Mom. Please don't worry about that." Hazel's doing fine, and besides, it's her way of expressing herself. His tone was polite, but it carried the weight of finality, the kind of tone children use when they've already chosen a side. I nodded slowly, pretending to accept it. I told him I was thinking of moving back to my old house, said it might give them more space, more privacy. He looked relieved, too relieved. That told me everything. He wasn't protecting Hazel out of loyalty. He was protecting the illusion she had built around them. After he went upstairs, I sat alone at the table staring at the clock, whose hidden camera had recorded weeks of lies. The second hand moved in steady circles, marking time, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. That night, I realized Elliot was no longer the boy who used to bring me flowers after his first paycheck. He was a man caught in a web spun from affection and manipulation. And if I wanted to free him, I couldn't confront the spider head-on. From that moment, I decided to move quietly, not as a mother pleading for understanding, but as a woman gathering truth. I would let them think I was tired, harmless, blind. Because sometimes the surest way to win a battle is to let the enemy believe you've already surrendered. Elliot didn't listen. He said I was interfering in his marriage, that I should trust his wife more. His words were polite, but the meaning stung like a slap. I nodded quietly, pretending to agree, though my heart felt heavy. A mother can sense when her child has stopped hearing her voice, not because he stopped loving her, but because someone else's whispers had filled the space. When Hazel learned that I was planning to leave, she suddenly changed her tone. She came into my room one morning, smiling sweetly, her voice dripping with false warmth. "Mom, stay with us until New Year's Eve," she said. "We're planning a big family celebration. I want to film a family reunion video for my followers. It'll be beautiful, 3 generations together." The words sounded affectionate, but I could hear the metallic ring of calculation behind them. Hazel never did anything without a camera in mind. The next day, the house filled with people I didn't know: photographers, stylists, a makeup artist. Hazel walked around giving orders, holding a tablet with a schedule for the shoot. She had ordered matching outfits for everyone: navy blue for the men, champagne silk for the women. Even the decorations looked designed for the camera, not for real joy. I stood near the window, watching them arrange lights and tripods, and wondered how many lies one could fit into a single frame. While all this was happening, my phone buzzed. It was Emma Clark, my lawyer, and one of the few people I still trusted. Her voice was calm but firm. "Mrs. Wells, we've reviewed the rental files. The tenant on the first floor of your Main Street building is now 4 months behind on payments. The name on the lease is Adrian Grant." My fingers tightened around the phone. Hazel's father. The same man who lectured me about wealth and respect. The same man who owned those flashy coffee shops, now living on borrowed money and false pride. I asked Emma to send me everything: copies of the lease bank statements, warning letters. Within an hour, my printer hummed softly, spitting out each document like a quiet truth the world had ignored. I placed them carefully into a brown envelope and slipped it into my handbag. Then I locked the drawer. That night, as Hazel rehearsed her fake laughter in front of the mirror and Elliot adjusted his suit for the family video, I sat in silence, hands folded over my purse. They thought I was just an old woman tagging along for another performance. But in my bag rested something far stronger than makeup or lights proof. Proof that the Grants' empire was built on lies, and that the first crack had already begun to show. All I needed now was the right moment to let the light in. I agreed to stay smiling the way an old woman should when she's grateful. But inside, my mind was sharper than ever. I had lived long enough to know that silence could be a weapon, and kindness, when used wisely, could be the perfect disguise. So I played my part. Every morning, I brewed the coffee before Hazel even woke up, wiped the counters, folded the napkins, and greeted the staff she hired for her family show with gentle small talk. I made sure my words were harmless, my expression calm. No one suspected that behind the soft smiles and quiet gestures I was watching, listening, waiting. At night, I pretended to be tired early. Hazel thought I went to bed after dinner, but I never slept right away. Instead, I sat in the dim light of my room, listening to the faint sounds of laughter and clinking glasses downstairs. Then one evening, I placed a small recording device behind the picture frame in the living room, a device no larger than a thumb, disguised as a decorative pin. It had a battery that lasted for weeks and a clear microphone that picked up every whisper. I didn't want revenge driven by anger. I wanted proof strong enough to speak for itself. The next few nights, I stayed quiet, pretending nothing had changed. During the day, Hazel gushed about her upcoming New Year family special, while her parents came and went talking fast and low in the evenings when they thought no one was around. I waited patiently. It was only a matter of time. Then it happened. One night, as I poured myself a glass of water in the kitchen, I heard Sophia Grant's voice drifting from the living room. She was whispering, tense and hurried. "We need to borrow more money before the landlord finds out about the arrears." My breath caught for a moment. The landlord, I thought that would be me. I held the glass steady, heart calm, and returned to my room as if nothing had happened. When I later played the recording, her words were clear, crisp, undeniable. My lips curled into a quiet smile. It wasn't joy. It was certainty. Now I had what I needed. Not gossip, not hearsay, but legal evidence. Proof that the Grants weren't just arrogant pretenders. They were frauds balancing on lies. And when the time came, I wouldn't raise my voice or seek pity. I would let the law and the truth do the talking. The living room glittered that night like a stage set for a play. Crystal lights shimmered from the chandelier, the champagne sparkled in tall glasses, and the faint hum of a live stream filled the air. New Year's Gala with the Grants. The banner behind the couch read, as if this was a charity event instead of a carefully curated show for followers. Cameras rolled, guests clinked glasses, and laughter echoed against the marble floor. I sat quietly at the end of the table, my silver gray shawl folded neatly across my lap. I had attended enough parties in my life to know when laughter was genuine and when it was aimed at someone. Sophia Grant, dressed in sequins that caught every light, leaned forward with that polished smile of hers. "Mrs. Wells," she began sweetly, but her eyes glinted with mockery. "Tell us, have you made a will for your son yet? Or are you saving only those supermarket discount coupons you love so much?" Laughter erupted around the room. It wasn't loud. It was cruel. I could feel the camera on me, the little red light blinking like a pulse. For a moment, I wondered if the audience watching online could sense the cruelty hidden beneath their glitter. Hazel, radiant in her gold dress, grabbed Elliot's arm and exclaimed for the camera, "My husband's mom may be poor, but she has a heart of gold. Don't worry, Mom. I'll take care of you forever." Her voice rose just enough to make sure the microphones caught every word. The guests clapped. Even Elliot smiled awkwardly, his eyes darting away from mine. I didn't flinch. Instead, I placed my glass down gently, letting the stem rest against the polished table. My heart didn't race. It slowed. I had been humiliated before by betrayal, by arrogance, but this time, the pain came not from their words, but from my son's silence. Yet I knew better than to react. Power, after all, is not in the noise. It is in the pause. So I smiled, the kind of calm, quiet smile that unsettles people who expect you to crumble. "I only hope," I said softly, "that all of you grow rich enough one day to afford kindness." For a moment, the room froze. The laughter faltered, hanging awkwardly in the air. Then someone coughed, and the host tried to steer the conversation elsewhere. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of my purse beside me. The one holding the documents, the lease, the overdue notices, and Sophia's own recorded confession about debt. The irony was almost poetic. They had mocked me for being poor while drinking in a house rented from me. I looked toward the chandelier, its crystals reflecting light like broken truths. That night, I realized the story wasn't about how they saw me. It was about how little they knew who I really was. I smiled gentle and unbothered, the way people expect a harmless old woman to smile. "I'm just a retired supermarket cashier," I said softly. "There's nothing left for me to give." My voice was calm, but I could feel the words settling into the air like dust. For a moment there was silence, then came the laughter. Not cruel at first, just condescending, the kind of laugh people use when they're convinced they're superior. I saw it in their faces, the quiet smugness of people who think kindness equals weakness. Hazel leaned toward me, camera ready, pretending affection. Her perfume was strong enough to sting my eyes. "Mom, you're the sweetest," she said brightly, wrapping an arm around my shoulder for the perfect shot. The flash went off. Within seconds, she uploaded the photo to her social media with the caption, "Family is wealth." I could almost hear the comments rolling in hearts. Praise, admiration, all for an illusion. Hazel loved the illusion more than the truth. I looked around the long dining table while the others returned to their champagne. Their laughter had the rhythm of money, hollow, rhythmic, rehearsed. Sophia kept talking about future investments between sips of wine, her bracelets clinking like tiny bells. Elliot looked uncomfortable, but said nothing, his eyes fixed on his glass. Then, at the far end of the table, I noticed Adrian. His hand slid discreetly under his napkin, adjusting a red envelope. He thought no one saw. But I did. The thin flap opened just enough for me to glimpse the edges of cash bills folded together with a betting slip. It wasn't the first time I had seen men like him gamble with other people's futures. The camera crew began changing batteries, and the room dimmed for a moment. The live stream paused, giving everyone a short break from their performance. I took the chance to rise quietly, reaching for my coat draped over the chair. The night air outside would be cold, but at least it would be honest. I wanted to leave before their laughter turned uglier. But Hazel spotted me immediately. "Mom, where are you going?" she called out loudly, drawing every gaze in the room. Her smile was bright, but her tone had sharp edges. "Don't leave yet. The audience loves you. We still have the final toast to film." She grabbed my wrist lightly, just enough to make it look affectionate on camera. I looked at her hand, her painted nails glittering under the chandelier, and thought how easy it was for her to hide cruelty behind polish. I forced a small smile and sat back down, folding my hands in my lap. Around me, the laughter resumed, brighter and emptier than before. They thought they had me cornered in their game, but I had already seen every card on the table. Hazel crossed her legs elegantly, her gold bracelet catching the light as she pulled a sleek black Chanel bag onto her lap. The camera crew had already packed up for the night, but the Grants' performance continued this time for each other. She unzipped the purse with theatrical flair and pulled out a glossy credit card, waving it like a trophy. "Let's make this party more interesting," she said, voice sweet but sharp. $5,000 each. Whoever loses tonight donates to my charity fund. And if someone can't afford it—" She paused for effect, her lips curling into a smirk. "They can go outside and play cards with the maids." Laughter erupted around the table. Elliot looked uncomfortable, shifting in his chair, but didn't speak. Sophia clapped her hands lightly, as if encouraging a performance, while Adrian chuckled into his drink. Hazel leaned toward me, still smiling that poisonous smile. "Mom," she said in a sing-song tone, "you probably don't have $5,000 on hand, right?" Want me to transfer for you?" The laughter grew louder, bouncing off the glass walls of the room. They thought it was harmless fun. They thought humiliation was entertainment. Adrian added between laughs, "Come on, Hazel, don't be cruel. She probably only has social security checks to her name." The words hit the air like small stones, not sharp enough to wound, but meant to bruise. I set my glass down gently, the soft clink cutting through their laughter. My pulse was steady. I had worked too many long nights, counted too many ledgers, and seen too many arrogant people crumble to be shaken by a table full of fools. I looked at Hazel, then at her father, and spoke quietly, so quietly that they had to lean in to hear. "There are games," I said, "that people who know the rules never play, because they understand the real price." For a moment, no one spoke. The silence felt heavier than any argument. Hazel blinked, unsure whether to laugh or feel insulted. Adrian's smile froze halfway, his hand still gripping his glass. Then Sophia gave an awkward laugh, trying to break the tension. "Oh, she's so wise," she said lightly, always with those poetic lines. But I didn't answer. I simply reached for my shawl and folded it over my arm. The chandelier light shimmered against the rim of my glass, as if reflecting something only I could see, the truth they would soon face. They saw me as old, weak, poor. Yet in that moment, I knew they were the ones playing a dangerous game without knowing who held the deck. I smiled faintly and shook my head. "I'm afraid I don't have the money to play that kind of game," I said softly, my tone calm, almost gentle. I thought that would end it. But instead, Hazel froze for half a second, her painted smile twitching. Then her face darkened, and her voice cut through the music like broken glass. "What did you just say?" She snapped loud enough for everyone to hear. "You don't have money. Then why are you sitting here acting like you belong? You're embarrassing this family." The laughter in the room died instantly. Even the music seemed to falter. Her words echoed off the marble walls, cruel and sharp. I sat still, my hands folded on my lap. "I didn't mean to offend anyone," I replied softly. But Hazel was already beyond reason. She stood up, towering over me in her glittering gown, anger burning through every elegant line she had drawn for herself. "You're the reason people look down on us," she shouted. "Living in our house, eating our food, pretending to be noble when you're just—" Hazel Elliott interrupted, his voice trembling. "That's enough." He looked torn, glancing between us, his hand half raised as if to stop her. But then Sophia's smooth voice drifted across the table like perfume. "Let her speak, Elliot," she said, her lips curling into a polite smile. "Maybe it's time your mother learned some manners." Hazel smirked, encouraged. "Exactly," she sneered. "Someone has to teach her how to behave in a real family." Her words stung not because they were true, but because they revealed what she feared most, that beneath all her luxury she was still grasping for belonging she'd never earned. I could have argued. I could have stood up and told her the truth about who really owned the walls surrounding her precious reputation. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed seated, my silence drawing a different kind of power. The quieter I became, the louder her rage grew. Suddenly, she reached across the table, grabbed my handbag, and flung it to the floor. The sound of it hitting the tiles was louder than any shout. A glass toppled, champagne splashing across the front of my blouse, the cold soaking into my skin. Hazel's voice rose to a scream. "Get out of my house," she shouted, pointing toward the door. "Right now." For a brief moment, no one moved. Elliot's mouth opened, but no words came. Sophia turned away, pretending to sip her wine. The chandelier above us sparkled cruelly, scattering light over a scene that looked almost staged, the perfect picture of humiliation. I stood slowly, wiped my sleeve, and looked at Hazel. My expression didn't break. My voice didn't shake. "Be careful," I said quietly. "This house may not be yours to throw anyone out of." The bag hit the marble floor with a heavy thud, its contents spilling like a wound opening in silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Hazel stood trembling with fury, her chest heaving, the champagne still dripping from my sleeve onto the floor. "Get out of my house," she shouted again, her voice sharp and cracking. But this time I didn't move toward the door. I simply bent down, slow and calm, as though time had decided to move only for me. I picked up my bag, brushed the dust from it, and wiped it gently with a napkin from the table. The entire room watched, confused, expectant, their laughter from moments ago now swallowed by an uncomfortable stillness. I straightened my back and unzipped the handbag, revealing a single yellow envelope. Its red legal seal caught the chandelier's light. "Mr. Grant," I said softly, turning my gaze toward Adrian, "I believe this might interest you." My tone was polite, almost warm, the kind of tone used in business meetings, not family feuds. Adrian blinked, clearly thrown off. Hazel frowned, glancing between us, her confusion growing with every second. This I continued. "Holding the envelope between my fingers is the lease agreement for the Morning Bean Cafe, your flagship coffee shop if I'm not mistaken. According to this document, the rent has been overdue for 4 months. The silence that followed was deafening. Adrian's face went pale, the blood draining from it, as if I had struck him. Sophia's hand froze halfway to her wine glass. Hazel looked around helplessly, trying to read the room, not yet understanding that the walls of her family's pride were beginning to crumble. Adrian tried to laugh it off, but his voice faltered. That must be some mistake," he stammered. "Our landlord." "Your landlord," I said quietly. Meeting his eyes, "is me." The words landed like thunder. Gasps rippled through the room. Even the camera crew, who had been resetting their equipment for the next live stream segment, stopped in their tracks. Hazel's mouth fell open, the color draining from her perfectly powdered face. Elliot looked at me as though seeing me for the first time in years. "I own 218 Main Street," I said evenly, my tone still calm. "The building your family's cafe has operated from since 2019. The one you've conveniently forgotten to pay rent for." I let the envelope rest on the table in front of Adrian. "Clark and Associates has already prepared the eviction notice effective this week, but I thought it would be more meaningful to deliver it in person." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the whispers began rippling like a wave through the guests. Hazel's trembling hand reached for Elliot's arm, but he pulled away. I stood there quietly, watching the empire of pretense collapse under the weight of a single truth. The envelope was not just a document, it was a verdict. Inside lay a neatly folded notice of lease termination issued by Clark and Associates law firm under California Civil Code Section 1946, stamped with a red seal and signed by a notary public. Every line of that paper spoke with the weight of law. Adrian Grant stared at it, blinking rapidly, as if reading a language he had long pretended not to understand. The name printed across the top, Morning Bean Cafe, left no room for doubt. His cafe, his signature, his unpaid debt. I had waited for this moment not out of vengeance, but out of precision. For 90 days, my attorney, Emma Clark, had sent 3 separate notices, each one politely worded, properly dated, and completely ignored. The Grants had assumed the landlord was just another aging widow, too soft to fight back, too fragile to press a claim. They were wrong. While they flaunted their luxury cars and designer handbags online, I was gathering everything: payment histories, bank statements, timestamps, and witness affidavits from the property manager. Every oversight they dismissed was now documented, certified, and ready to strike. As I placed the paper on the table, the sound of it landing was louder than any accusation. The laughter died instantly. Champagne glasses froze midair. Even the chandelier seemed to hold its breath. I looked at Adrian, the man who once bragged that he didn't rent, he owned. Now he sat pale and trembling, staring at the legal notice that proved otherwise. Hazel's confused whisper broke the silence. Dad, what is that? Adrian tried to speak, but his voice cracked. It's the lease for our cafe. The landlord. He looked at me, disbelief flickering across his face. She's the landlord. I nodded once, calm and deliberate. 4 months overdue, I said quietly. 3 formal warnings ignored. Under Section 1946, this document terminates your lease effective immediately. The building must be vacated within 30 days, or I will proceed with eviction. No one spoke. The weight of my words pressed down heavier than the crystal chandelier above. Sophia's smile faded, her lipstick trembling at the corners. Hazel looked as though someone had just pulled the floor out from beneath her. Elliot sat frozen, torn between shame and shock. I didn't raise my voice or demand respect. I didn't need to. The law was speaking for me. Every assumption they had made that I was weak, poor, forgettable, crumbled in that single moment. The silence that filled the room wasn't awkward. It was reverent, the kind reserved for those who finally understand they've underestimated the wrong person. And in that silence, I finally allowed myself to breathe. Not as a victim, but as the quiet architect of justice. Weeks before the New Year's party, while the Grants were busy filming their flawless family videos, I was meeting quietly with my attorney, Emma Clark. I trusted Emma not because she was aggressive, but because she was precise. In her world, every word on paper carried the weight of a hammer. I handed her a folder of documents, bank statements, and lease records, then signed the power of attorney, a legal authorization that allowed her to act fully on my behalf. From that moment, she wasn't just my lawyer. She was my shield, and when needed, my sword. Emma began digging into the records related to the Morning Bean Cafe chain. Within a week, she called me with her findings. Her voice was calm, but edged with disbelief. Mrs. Wells, she said the Grants are sitting on a mountain of violations. Their company owes over $30,000 in unpaid business taxes and has been delaying employee wages, clear breaches of Labor Code Section 204. I could almost hear her flipping through the documents, each page a small bomb waiting to go off. They've ignored multiple warnings from the state labor office. It's not just negligence anymore, it's pattern and intent. I listened in silence, letting her words sink in. Then I said what I had already decided days earlier. Don't file anything yet. Wait until December 31st. Emma paused. You want to time the release? I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Yes, I said quietly. On New Year's Eve, they'll be live streaming their perfect life to the world. That's when the truth will echo loudest. She understood immediately. Over the next few weeks, she compiled every piece of evidence, tax statements, unpaid invoices, and payroll complaints. She even subpoenaed emails between Adrian Grant and several suppliers where he manipulated payment schedules and concealed transactions under false invoice numbers. Every document was dated verified and notarized. What they saw as confidence was actually complacency, and complacency always leaves fingerprints. When I reviewed the files, I could almost feel the structure of their empire trembling on paper. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was revelation. I told Emma to keep everything sealed until my signal, until the night they laughed the loudest. We both knew timing was everything. Power doesn't just come from the truth. It comes from when and how you choose to reveal it. Adrian's face drained of color, as if every drop of blood had abandoned him. His confident smile vanished, replaced by a look of disbelief that twisted his mouth into something almost childlike. His hand trembled as he tried to pour himself another glass of champagne, but the liquid splashed over the rim, staining the tablecloth. That building, he stammered, voice barely above a whisper. That building on Main Street. It's yours. Hazel turned sharply toward her father. her manicured hand frozen midair, still clutching her phone. "Dad, what's going on?" she asked, her voice cracking under the weight of confusion. Sophia, sitting beside him, let out a brittle laugh that sounded more like a cough. "Oh, Adrian, you must be mistaken," she said quickly, her tone syrupy with panic. "It's probably just a misunderstanding. Mrs. Wells must have meant another property." Her words floated in the air, thin and fragile, breaking apart before they reached anyone's belief. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I reached into my purse again, slowly, deliberately. The movement alone silenced what little noise remained in the room. I placed another document on the table, a crisp white sheet bearing the seal of the county recorder's office. "This," I said evenly, sliding it toward Adrian, "is the property title for 218 Main Street. Issued under my name, Kennedy Wells, listed here as the sole title holder." Adrian's hands hovered above the paper as though touching it would burn him. His eyes darted across the text, searching for an error, a loophole, a way to deny the truth that was staring back at him. But the proof was undeniable: the address, the parcel number, the official stamp. The same building he had mocked the landlord of for being too soft, too old, too timid, was mine. Hazel's phone slipped from her fingers, the soft thud echoing like a verdict. "Dad," she whispered again, but he didn't answer. Sophia tried to smile, her lipstick trembling. "I'm sure we can resolve this peacefully," she said, voice quivering. But even she couldn't hide the realization dawning in her eyes: the empire she flaunted online was built on borrowed walls. I leaned back in my chair, calm as ever. "There's no misunderstanding," I said softly. "The lease, the tax records, the property title all point to one fact. I own the building your business depends on." My voice wasn't loud, but the quiet certainty in it was enough to fill the entire room. Adrian looked at me, then truly looked, and what he saw wasn't a poor old woman. It was power wrapped in patience. I didn't threaten him. I didn't need to. My gaze did the talking. He knew that with one phone call, I could end his leases, trigger an audit, and unravel everything his family had built on deceit. For the first time that night, it wasn't champagne that made him shake, it was fear. "I don't like being called poor," I said softly, my tone calm but sharp enough to cut through the air, "especially by someone who owes me money." The words were not loud yet. They sliced through the room like a cold blade. No one spoke. The laughter that had once filled the air was gone, leaving only the ticking of the wall clock, steady, merciless, counting every second of their silence. Adrian's jaw tightened. His hands twitched slightly on the tablecloth, as if he wanted to protest, but couldn't find the strength. Sophia sat motionless beside him, her fake smile frozen in place, the color draining from her cheeks. Hazel clutched her wineglass so tightly that her knuckles turned white, the stem trembling between her fingers. The room that once glimmered with champagne and confidence now felt heavy, suffocating like a stage after the final act when the spotlight has turned cold. Elliot stood near the edge of the room, frozen in place. He didn't look at me, but I could see his reflection in the glass door, shoulders tense, eyes down, shame spreading across his face. For the first time, I didn't feel anger toward him, only quiet sadness. He wasn't cruel. He was blind. And blindness, I had learned, was sometimes more dangerous than malice. I bent down slightly, picked up the folder from the table, and slipped it carefully back into my handbag. Every movement was slow, deliberate, and measured the opposite of their panic. When I finally straightened, I turned toward them, my voice low but steady. "I taught my son one thing," I said. "A debt must be paid, whether it's money, respect, or rent. Because someday, the person you laugh at might be the one holding your future." No one dared to breathe. Hazel's eyes glistened with tears she didn't want to shed. Adrian stared at the floor, his arrogance evaporating into silence. Even Sophia, who always had a polished remark ready, stayed quiet, the pretense gone from her face. For years, they had performed wealth like it was a religion-worshipping image, ignoring truth. Now the truth stood right before them, wearing a calm smile and a steady gaze. I reached for my shawl, draped it over my shoulders, and looked at the clock one last time. Midnight was near. The new year would begin in a few minutes, and for the Grants, it would begin with a debt they could no longer hide. I gave a small nod to Elliot, not of anger, but of quiet farewell. Then I walked toward the door, each step echoing in the hollow silence they had created for themselves. "Don't ever confuse humility with weakness," I said before leaving. "They're not the same thing." That night I left without another word. The moment I stepped out of the Grant residence, the cold winter air hit my face sharp and clean, a contrast to the suffocating luxury I had just escaped. Behind me, I could still hear muffled voices through the tall glass doors. Hazel's cries rose above the rest, high-pitched and desperate, while Adrian barked orders into his phone, his voice breaking under panic. The lights in the grand house remained bright, but they no longer shone with pride. They flickered like the dying glow of a fire that had burned too long. I didn't look back. My heels clicked steadily along the stone path as I walked toward the waiting car. The driver, startled by the sight of my wet, champagne-stained sleeve, quickly opened the door without a word. I slid into the back seat, exhaled slowly, and closed my eyes for a moment. The world outside moved quietly, frost on the pavement, soft snow beginning to fall, the kind of silence that comes only after chaos. Instead of returning to my son's house, I directed the driver to Riverview Inn, a small but elegant hotel by the river. When I checked in, the young receptionist smiled kindly, unaware that she was greeting the woman who had just dismantled one of the town's most pretentious families. In my room, I placed my handbag on the desk, pulled out my laptop, and began to type an email. To Emma Clark. Subject: Execution of lease termination. Effective January 2nd. I wrote terminate all leases. Begin tax compliance audit with state authorities. Include Morning Bean Cafe and all associated business accounts. K. Wells. I reread it twice. It was concise, professional, final, everything this moment required. When I clicked, send, the soft whoosh of the outgoing message felt like a quiet ending. Or perhaps a beginning. Through the window, I could see the faint glow of the Grant mansion in the distance. The night sky was clear now, stars faintly glimmering above the river. I imagined Hazel's glittering dress crumpled on the floor, her tears smudging her perfect makeup. Adrian pacing with his phone pressed to his ear, begging a lawyer for a miracle that would never come. I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself a long, steady breath. Then I whispered, half to myself, half to the memory of every insult I had endured. I spent my whole life learning not to cry because of others, but to make them cry for what they've done. That thought warmed me more than the tea the hotel staff later brought up. It wasn't triumph. I felt it was peace, the kind that comes when justice finally aligns with silence. It happened exactly 1 week after that night, the night I walked out of their house and didn't look back. I remember waking up early that Monday, making myself a cup of black coffee at the Riverview Inn and watching the fog lift slowly over the river. I didn't need to check the clock to know what was coming. By the time the church bells struck 8, San Jose was already alive with sirens. I saw it first on my phone, a live stream notification from a barista at the Morning Bean Cafe. The image was shaky, but clear enough. Officers from the California Franchise Tax Board and the city police were entering the shop, their jackets marked Investigation Unit. One of them read aloud a document I knew by heart a temporary asset freeze order. Another was sealing the registers with yellow tape. Customers stood frozen, some whispering, some filming. Within minutes, the video had gone viral, the Grant Cafe chain under federal investigation. I sat there quietly watching it unfold like a play whose script I had written months ago. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't move. Then the scene shifted this time to the headquarters. I recognized every corner of that office, the one they used to flaunt in their online videos. There he was, Adrian Grant standing by the counter face, pale voice trembling. I could read his lips even without sound. This must be a mistake. It wasn't. The officer handed him the warrant, and he looked like a man whose reflection had just betrayed him. Sophia tried to intervene, pleading with tears in her eyes, clutching her pearls as if they could save her. "We only missed our taxes," I heard her cry through the background noise. But the law doesn't bend for performance. When the officers escorted Adrian outside, cameras flashed like fireworks. His empire built on arrogance and debt was collapsing in daylight, and the whole city was watching. I imagined Hazel at home, scrolling through the live stream, seeing her father in handcuffs. Perhaps she cried, perhaps she didn't, but I knew humiliation cuts deeper than any wound. As for me, I didn't feel joy, just stillness. There's a moment when truth finally stands tall, after years of being buried, and it doesn't need applause, it just breathes. When I turned off my phone, the reflection of the morning light shimmered on the window. I whispered to myself, justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply arrives on time. Then I finished the last sip of my cold coffee. It tasted bitter, but clean, the flavor of peace earned the hard way. I wasn't there in person that morning. I didn't need to be. Emma Clark knew exactly what to do. She walked into the state tax compliance office at 9 sharp, her heels clicking steadily against the marble floor, carrying a leather case that weighed more than it looked. Inside was everything we had gathered over 6 months, the quiet, patient evidence of deceit. She placed the thick folder on the conference table before the officials and opened it with deliberate calm. "These," she began, her voice firm, "are payroll statements showing 6 months of unpaid wages for multiple employees under the Morning Bean Cafe chain." She handed over the spreadsheets, each stamped and verified. Then came the next stack, copies of falsified invoices, doctored accounting ledgers, and internal emails where the grant's management instructed staff to adjust sales numbers before quarterly filings. Emma's tone never wavered. "The source of this data," she said, "is an anonymous witness who has monitored these violations for 6 months, recording and preserving every transaction. She didn't have to name me, she never would. I had spent half a year gathering every piece, quietly, screenshots, payment slips, and records the grants thought were buried deep in their systems. One document in particular turned the room cold, a digital trail showing money withdrawn under employees' names, then funneled into cryptocurrency wallets to evade business income taxes. It was clean, traceable, and devastating. The officials whispered among themselves, passing the file back and forth, their faces tightening with each page. As Emma concluded, she stacked the documents neatly and looked straight at the cameras set up by the press. The reporters had been invited for transparency, but we both knew what that look meant. It was my signal, the moment to make everything public. Within minutes, she authorized her paralegal to release the files to verified news outlets. The truth, once confined to folders and whispers, was now free to breathe in daylight. At the Riverview Inn, I watched the press conference on television. My hands were steady as I sipped tea. When Emma's eyes lifted toward the camera and that knowing pause lingered, I smiled faintly. The Grants had spent months performing a show of glamour and wealth. Today, their real story was the headline. Justice doesn't always arrive with flashing lights. Sometimes it wears a navy suit, walks into a government building, and speaks calmly into a microphone. I never planned to humiliate her publicly, but sometimes the truth has a way of finding its own stage. A week after the investigation went public, I uploaded a single video to her old YouTube channel, the one she had used to pretend to be a perfect daughter-in-law. The title was simple, Behind the Mask. It opened with soft piano music, the same melody Hazel once used in her viral video, caring for my mother-in-law like my own mom. But within seconds, the tone shifted. The screen split on one side, the polished version she had edited for millions to see her spoon-feeding me soup, smiling sweetly for the camera. On the other, the raw footage I had secretly recorded with my hidden camera. In that version, she slammed the same bowl onto the counter and hissed, "Eat it yourself, you smell like cheap detergent." For a few seconds, the audience said nothing. Then the comments began to flood in. Karma's real. That poor woman was an angel. Hazel should be ashamed. I sat in silence watching from my hotel room as the view count rose into the hundreds of thousands. The clip of her shouting, "You're just a smelly old woman living off my husband," replayed across social media within hours. Brands that once sponsored her skincare coffee home decor released statements one by one announcing the termination of all contracts. Hazel tried to fight back. That evening, she went live on Instagram, her eyes swollen from crying, voice trembling. "It's all taken out of context," she said. "I loved my mother-in-law. She just misunderstood me." But her words were drowned out by a flood of angry comments. Viewers replayed the video side by side, exposing every lie, every manipulation. Then came the sound she didn't expect to knock at the door. At first, she ignored it, forcing a nervous laugh for the camera. The knocking grew louder. Finally, 2 police officers entered the frame, holding a summons. One of them said clearly, "Hazel Grant, you are being called in for questioning regarding financial fraud and contract manipulation." The live stream cut off abruptly, leaving thousands of viewers staring at a frozen image of her face, terrified, pale, cornered by the truth. I watched it all unfold without a smile. I didn't need to feel joy, only closure. People called it karma, but I knew better. It wasn't fate. It was simply consequence. Elliot called me 9 times that morning. My phone buzzed on the nightstand at the Riverview Inn, but I didn't pick up. I let it ring until the sound faded into silence. I had nothing left to explain. The night before, I had already written the only message I needed to leave him. When you learn to tell what's real from what's fake, call me back. By the time the news broke about Hazel's summons, Elliot was panicking. The police had arrived at their house, the neighbors were whispering, and the online storm had turned into a full-blown hurricane. He drove straight to my old home, pounding on the door like a desperate child. But the house was empty now. The curtains drawn, the rooms quiet, the faint scent of lavender still lingering in the air. On the kitchen table, under a soft beam of morning light, he found a single handwritten note. It read, "Son, sometimes silence is the only answer worthy of those who refuse to see the truth." Omi. He stood there for a long time, reading the words again and again. His hands trembled, smudging the ink where a tear had fallen. Outside, a news van was parked on the corner, broadcasting live footage of Adrian Grant being escorted into a federal car. The anchors spoke about tax evasion, unpaid wages, and elder financial abuse. Elliot didn't need anyone to tell him who had gathered that evidence or who had made sure it reached the authorities safely. He knew. For years he had defended Hazel, believing her kindness, her sweet smile, her carefully curated image. And for years he had doubted me, the quiet mother who never raised her voice, who preferred facts to feelings and patience to pride. But now, as he watched his father-in-law's empire crumble, the truth hit him harder than any accusation could. The woman he had dismissed as too old-fashioned was the one who had saved him from becoming an accomplice. He sat down in the empty kitchen, the same place where I used to make him breakfast before his police shifts. The refrigerator still hummed softly. On the counter, his old mug, chipped, faded, but clean, sat where I'd left it. He poured himself a glass of water, though his throat was too tight to swallow. Maybe someday, I thought, he'll understand. Love isn't always gentle. Sometimes it's the hand that pulls you out of the fire even when you're screaming to stay in. By the end of January, the Grant name had become a headline, not one of glamour or prestige, but of disgrace. The Morning Bean Cafe chain was officially suspended by the California Business Licensing Board. Its accounts were frozen, its branches padlocked, and its once loyal suppliers began announcing one after another that they were terminating all contracts. The proud family empire that had flaunted success across social media was now a ghost of itself. Shuttered storefronts, empty shelves, unpaid workers demanding answers. The newspapers did not spare them. On the front page of the San Jose Herald was a photo of Adrian and Sophia leaving the courthouse, their faces pale under the morning sun. The headline read, "Local business owners under federal investigation for wage fraud." Beneath it, reporters detailed how the couple had withheld employee wages, falsified invoices, and transferred company assets under fake accounts. For a man who once lectured me about class and wealth, seeing his name in print beside the word fraud was a kind of poetry only truth could write. Hazel didn't escape either. The state's financial crime unit opened a separate case against her for income falsification and deceptive brand partnerships. It turned out many of her sponsorships had been based on fabricated engagement data and false charitable claims. The investigation report said the penalties could reach $50,000, not counting restitution to the brands she misled. Her social media channels, once filled with applause and adoration, now drowned in condemnation. Every comment section burned with phrases like, "Karma's real and you can't fake kindness forever." I watched it all unfold from my new apartment by the sea, a quiet, sunlit place overlooking the Pacific. The waves outside moved with slow rhythm, soft and endless, nothing like the noise of their chaos. On my television, the news anchor spoke about the collapse of a once beloved family business, while a small photo of Adrian, Sophia, and Hazel appeared in the corner of the screen. I didn't smile, but I didn't feel sorrow either. The law had spoken. Karma had echoed. For years, they believed power came from wealth, status, and followers. But the real power, I had learned, comes from truth, patient, silent, and precise. I didn't need to make another call or file another complaint. Everything I had set in motion had already found its course. I turned off the TV, opened the window, and let the sea breeze drift in. Somewhere out there, the world was still noisy with gossip and speculation. But in that small, quiet apartment, I finally felt what I had been searching for all along: peace. Because sometimes, justice doesn't need your hands. It just needs time. Karma doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it comes quietly, one headline at a time. 2 months after the investigation, Hazel was arrested on charges of fraudulent sponsorship and contract deception. The very camera that had once adored her face now captured her in handcuffs. I saw the footage on the evening news she tried to hide behind her coat as reporters shouted questions, but there's no filter strong enough to soften the truth. The charge sheet listed live stream fraud, misrepresentation of brand partnerships, and falsified income declarations. The court set bail at $20,000, but the internet had already passed its sentence. Elliot's name appeared a few days later. Local police officer suspended pending investigation, the caption read. My son, once so proud in his uniform, stood in the background of the courthouse photo shoulders. Heavy, face hollow. They said he had helped Hazel move funds between accounts, unaware it was considered obstruction. The department didn't arrest him, but they suspended him for ethics violation until the case was resolved. Watching him on that screen, I didn't feel anger anymore. Just sorrow, the kind that comes when a child finally learns a lesson you prayed he'd never have to learn the hard way. As for Adrian and Sophia, their empire crumbled completely. Bankruptcy court stripped them of every asset, the coffee shops, their cars, even the house with the marble staircase they once flaunted on social media. When the bank took possession, the foreclosure notice was stapled right over a faded sign that once read, "The Grant Family Home, built on love and success." I suppose in a way that sign wasn't wrong. It was built on love, but for the wrong things. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply packed my bags and left California for good. I moved to a quiet coastal city in Oregon, into a sunlit apartment overlooking the water. My days became simple again, tending to my orchids, walking by the harbor, and reading old books I once never had time for. The rent payments from my building arrived like clockwork, enough to live comfortably, but not extravagantly. Peace doesn't need extravagance. Every month, I sent a donation to the Elder Justice Foundation, always under the name Anonymous. They once reached out asking for a photo or statement. I never replied. My story didn't need to be told. The results already spoke for themselves. Karma had done its work, and I finally was free. The first morning of the new year arrived quietly. The sky was painted with a faint gold, and the air smelled of salt and jasmine from the small balcony garden I'd planted myself. I sat in my favorite chair, a cup of coffee steaming in my hands, watching the sunlight touch the sea in slow ripples. Somewhere in the distance, a bird sang soft free, untouched by all the noise the world had made in the past year. I opened my leather-bound journal, the one I'd carried since the days when survival was my only goal. My handwriting trembled a little now, not from weakness, but from peace. I wrote, "Silence is the most expensive gift we can offer to those who once despised us." And I meant it. After all the shouting, the lies, and the pretending, silence was my victory. It was the sound of freedom. My phone vibrated beside me. Elliot again. His 20th call in the last few weeks. I looked at the screen, his name glowing faintly. For a moment, I imagined answering, hearing the guilt in his voice, the apologies he didn't yet know how to form. But then I smiled softly and set the phone down face down on the table. Some conversations can wait until truth grows roots in a person's heart. Until then, silence will do. Across the street, through the light mist of the morning, I could see the building I once bought in secret, the 3-story structure that had started it all. Its gray bricks glistened under the sunrise. To most people, it was just another property on Main Street. To me, it was a reminder that dignity once reclaimed stands taller than any tower of deceit. I took another sip of coffee and leaned back, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. The waves kept moving, unbothered, eternal. I closed my eyes and whispered a small prayer, not for revenge, but for peace, for all women who had ever been silenced, doubted, or dismissed. Then, as if speaking directly to whoever might one day hear my story, I said quietly, "If you've ever been looked down upon because of your age or your wallet, don't stay silent. Tell your story. Because sometimes the most beautiful revenge is simply living better than they ever imagined you could." And with that, I let the morning light fill the room, and I smiled not as a victor, but as a woman who had finally found herself again.